The Belmont Grand Hotel stood tall against the evening sky, its glass facade reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. It was one of those places where people came to escape their ordinary lives, even if only for a night. The lobby buzzed, with activity as guests checked in, bellhops carried luggage, and the faint sound of jazz music played softly in the background. Among the crowd stood Karoline Leavitt, her presence calm yet commanding. She wore a tailored navy blue dress that hugged her figure perfectly, paired with heels that clicked lightly on the marble floor as she moved toward the reception desk. Karoline had not planned this trip lightly. For weeks she had debated whether or not to come here to face him. Daniel Leavitt, her estranged husband, owned this hotel. They had not spoken in months, not since their last argument turned into a cold silence that neither seemed willing to break. But something inside her whispered that coming here was necessary. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just the need to understand why things had fallen apart so completely. At the front desk, a young woman with curly red hair and freckles greeted her with a wide smile. Her name tag read Amanda. She looked eager, almost too eager, like someone who wanted to prove herself on her first day. Amanda adjusted her glasses and leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the counter. "Good evening. Welcome to the Belmont Grand Hotel. How may I assist you today?" Amanda asked, her voice bright and cheerful. Karoline hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'd like to book a room for tonight," she said, her tone polite but reserved. She handed over her credit card without meeting Amanda's eyes, focusing instead on the intricate patterns etched into the marble countertop. "Of course," Amanda replied, typing quickly on her computer. As she worked, she glanced up at Karoline, trying to make conversation. "Are you visiting the city for business or pleasure?" Karoline considered the question briefly before answering. "Neither, really. Just personal reasons." Amanda nodded, sensing that prying further might not be wise. She continued entering information into the system, occasionally humming along to the soft jazz playing overhead. After a few moments, she frowned at the screen, then tilted her head thoughtfully. "Well, we do have availability," Amanda said slowly, clicking through several screens. "But honestly, most of our standard rooms are booked tonight because of an event downtown. We could upgrade you to something nicer if you'd like." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Something nicer?" "Yes. The penthouse suite is available. It's absolutely stunning. Spacious living area, panoramic views of the city, and a jacuzzi tub big enough for two." Amanda grinned, clearly proud of her pitch. "And don't worry, I can offer it to you at a discounted rate since it wasn't originally reserved." For a split second, Karoline felt tempted. A part of her wanted to indulge in luxury, to feel pampered after months of emotional turmoil. But another part of her wondered if accepting such an extravagant offer would send the wrong message. Still, she decided against arguing. Whatever happened next, she told herself, was fate's doing. "That sounds fine," Karoline said finally, her voice steady. "Go ahead and book it." Amanda beamed, thrilled that her suggestion had been accepted. She processed the reservation, unaware of the monumental error she was about to make. Instead of double-checking the room assignment, she simply selected the penthouse suite from the list of available options and finalized the booking. Within minutes, Karoline was handed a key card and given directions to the elevator. As Karoline stepped away from the desk, Amanda sighed happily to herself. "Another satisfied guest," she murmured under her breath, completely oblivious to the chaos brewing behind the scenes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hotel, Daniel Leavitt was finishing up a long day of meetings. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with gray, he exuded authority. His sharp suit and polished shoes made him look every bit the successful businessman he was. Yet beneath his composed exterior lay a man burdened by guilt and regret. He hadn't seen Karolina since their separation, and though he tried to convince himself that he was better off alone, there were nights when loneliness crept in. Just as Daniel was packing up his papers, his assistant, Ryan, knocked on the doorframe of his office. Ryan was younger than Daniel, with sandy blonde hair and a laid-back demeanor that often balanced out Daniel's intensity. "Hey, boss," Ryan began cautiously. "There's something you should know. Someone checked into the penthouse suite. Tonight." Daniel froze, his hand hovering mid-air above his briefcase. "What? Who?" "That suite is mine. It's always been reserved for me." Ryan shrugged apologetically. "I don't know all the details, but apparently the receptionist messed up and gave it to someone else. I figured you'd want to handle it personally." Daniel groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. This was the last thing he needed after a grueling day. "Fine," he muttered, grabbing his jacket. "Let's go see what kind of disaster awaits me upstairs." The ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this mix-up was more than just bad luck. Something about tonight felt different, almost fated. When the elevator doors slid open, he stepped out into the quiet hallway, the plush carpet muffling the sound of his footsteps. He approached the door to the penthouse suite, hesitating for a moment before knocking firmly. Inside, Karoline heard the knock and frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Setting down the book she had been flipping through, she walked to the door and opened it. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, frozen in disbelief. "Karoline?" Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel," she replied, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, Amanda called Daniel's phone, her panicked voice echoing through the receiver. "Mr. Leavitt, I am so sorry. I didn't realize you weren't supposed to. I thought—" Daniel cut her off with a wave of his hand, silencing her frantic apologies. He hung up and turned back to Karoline, who now looked equally stunned. "Well," Daniel said dryly, attempting to lighten the mood. "This is awkward." Karoline crossed her arms, her gaze narrowing. "You think?" And so what was meant to be a simple stay at a hotel turned into something far more complicated. A collision of past and present, mistakes and misunderstandings, all set against the backdrop of a luxurious penthouse suite. The penthouse suite was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. Karoline stood by the door, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. She looked at Daniel as though he were a stranger, even though she had spent years knowing every detail of his face, the way his jaw clenched when he was upset, or how his dark eyes softened when he smiled. But now, those same features felt foreign to her, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he hadn't been able to break, and let out a sigh. "Look, I didn't know you'd be here," he said, his tone defensive but tinged with guilt. "This isn't exactly how I imagined, well, any of this." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "How did you imagine it? Us running into each other randomly in your hotel? Or maybe you thought I'd never show up at all?" Her words stung more than Daniel cared to admit. He opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss. Instead, he took a step back, putting some distance between them. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. "I wasn't expecting this. Clearly there's been a mistake." Karoline rolled her eyes. "A mistake? That's rich, coming from you." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You always have excuses, don't you? For everything." Daniel frowned, his patience wearing thin. "Excuses? Really, Karoline? After everything we've been through, you think I'm standing here making excuses?" He gestured toward the room around them. "This is my space, my hotel, and somehow you end up in it without either of us planning it. Doesn't that strike you as strange?" Karoline hesitated, her anger faltering for just a moment. She glanced around the suite, taking in its opulence, the sleek furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. It all felt so familiar, yet so distant, like fragments of a life she once shared with Daniel but could barely recognize anymore. "Why are you even here?" Daniel asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice softened, almost hesitant. "You haven't called. You haven't written. Not since, well, you know." Karoline turned away, walking toward the window. She stared out at the glittering lights of the city, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. "Maybe I came because I wanted answers," she said quietly. "Or maybe I just needed to see if there was anything left worth saving." Her honesty caught Daniel off guard. He stepped closer, stopping a few feet behind her. "And? Did you find what you were looking for?" Karoline didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and touched the glass, tracing the outline of a distant building with her fingertip. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I do know one thing. You're not the man I married." Daniel flinched at her words, though he knew deep down they were true. "People change," he said softly. "Life changes us. I made mistakes, Karoline, big ones, but I never stopped caring about you." She spun around to face him, her expression a mix of frustration and sadness. "Caring isn't enough, Daniel. You can't fix years of neglect and betrayal with a few heartfelt words. Actions matter. Choices matter. And yours." She trailed off, shaking her head. "They broke me." Daniel looked down, unable to meet her eyes. He knew she was right. Over the years, he had become consumed by work, letting the pressures of running the hotel overshadow everything else. He had pushed Karoline away, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but resentment and silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice heavy with regret. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could go back to the way things were before." Karoline laughed bitterly. "Before? Before when? Before you started lying to me? Before you chose money over us? Or before you decided I wasn't important enough to fight for?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had only been trying to provide for her, to give her the life she deserved. But he knew it wouldn't matter. Excuses wouldn't undo the damage he had caused. "I messed up," Daniel admitted. "I messed up badly, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it if I have to. But I need you to know something, Karoline. I never stopped loving you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of his confession hung in the air, thick and unyielding. Karoline searched his face, looking for any sign of dishonesty, but all she saw was sincerity. It scared her. The idea that maybe, just maybe, some part of what they once had still existed beneath the rubble of their broken marriage. Before she could respond, Amanda appeared at the doorway, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Leavitt." "Mrs. Leavitt. Miss Leavitt. I'm so sorry to interrupt," she stammered, clutching a clipboard to her chest. "I didn't realize, I should have checked, It's fine, Amanda," Daniel interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "We'll sort this out later." Amanda nodded quickly, backing away from the door. "Of course, sorry again." She disappeared as quickly as she had arrived, leaving Daniel and Karoline alone once more. Karoline sighed, turning her attention back to the view outside. "Well, that was awkward," Daniel chuckled, despite himself. "Yeah, I guess it was." He hesitated, then added, "Listen, Karoline, I'll move to another room. You shouldn't have to deal with this mess on top of everything else." To his surprise, Karoline shook her head. "No, stay. If this is your suite, then it's your problem to figure out, besides." She paused, glancing at him briefly. "Maybe it's time we talked properly about everything." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by her suggestion. "Are you serious?" Karoline shrugged. "Why not? We're already here. Might as well make the best of it." He studied her for a moment, trying to gauge whether she truly meant what she said. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, let's talk." They sat down on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them feeling impossibly vast. At first, the conversation was strained, filled with awkward pauses and hesitant questions. But as the hours passed, they began to open up, sharing memories of happier times and admitting truths they had long kept buried. Karoline told Daniel about the loneliness she had felt during their separation, about the nights she spent wondering where it all went wrong. In turn, Daniel confessed his fears of failure, of losing not just the hotel but also the woman he loved. They laughed at old jokes and cried over unresolved pain, slowly chipping away at the walls they had built between them. By the time the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the suite had shifted. The tension that had once filled the room was replaced by something softer, something fragile yet hopeful. For the first time in months, they felt like two people who might actually stand a chance of finding their way back to each other. As they prepared to retire for the night, Daniel stopped Karoline before she could retreat to the bedroom. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "For staying, for talking, for giving me another chance." Karoline looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "We've got a long road ahead of us, but maybe, just maybe, we can start somewhere new." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing in the dimly lit living room. He watched her go, a small smile playing on his lips. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. Tonight had been the beginning of something, a chance to rewrite their story, one honest conversation at a time. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, casting soft golden rays across the room. Karoline woke up earlier than she intended, lying still in the plush king-sized bed as her thoughts swirled like leaves caught in a breeze. Last night had been unexpected. She hadn't planned to stay in Daniel's suite, let alone have such an open and raw conversation with him. It felt strange, almost surreal, to share so much after months of silence. She glanced at the clock on the bedside table. It was barely 7 a.m., but sleep eluded her. Quietly, she got out of bed, pulling on a robe from the closet before stepping into the living area. The suite was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the city waking up outside. On the coffee table, she noticed something that hadn't been there the night before, a leather-bound folder marked confidential. Curiosity tugged at her. Karoline hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. The folder looked official, its edges worn from use. She flipped it open cautiously, scanning the first page. What she found made her heart sink. The documents inside detailed shady business dealings involving Daniel and one of his investors, a man named Greg Lawson. There were contracts, emails, and financial records, all pointing to questionable decisions Daniel had made to keep the hotel afloat. Karoline sat down heavily on the couch, her mind racing. Each page revealed more about how far Daniel had gone to protect his empire. Loans taken under dubious terms, partnerships with questionable individuals, and even hints of bribery. It wasn't illegal per se, but it was unethical, and it contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. Had he sacrificed his integrity for money, for power, or worse, for her? Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. She didn't know what to think. A part of her wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but another part couldn't ignore the evidence staring back at her. Was this why he had changed so much over the years? Why he had pushed her away? Because he was drowning in secrets? Before she could process her emotions further, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning quickly, she saw Daniel entering the living area, dressed in casual slacks and a button-down shirt. He froze when he noticed the folder in her hands. "Karoline," he said, his voice cautious. "What are you doing with that?" She held up the folder, her expression unreadable. "Care to explain what this is?" Daniel sighed deeply, running, a hand through his hair. He walked over to the couch and sat down beside her, though he kept some distance between them. "I was going to tell you," he began. "Eventually." "When?" Karoline demanded, her voice rising slightly. "When would you have told me, Daniel? After I forgave you? After we tried to fix things? Or never?" "It's not what it looks like," he insisted, his tone pleading. "Yes, I made some bad choices, but I did it to save the hotel, to save us. You don't understand how hard it was to keep everything together." Karoline shook her head, disbelief etched on her face. "No, Daniel. You don't get to justify this by saying you did it for me. These aren't just bad choices. This is dishonesty, manipulation. How am I supposed to trust you when you've been hiding all this?" "I wasn't hiding it from you," he argued. "Not really. I didn't want you to worry. I thought if I could handle it myself, I could protect you." "That's not your job," Karoline snapped, standing abruptly. "You don't get to decide what I should or shouldn't worry about." We're supposed to be partners, Daniel. Equals. But you treated me like I was fragile, like I couldn't handle the truth. Daniel looked down, guilt washing over him. I know I messed up. Again. But please, Karoline, hear me out. I'm trying to fix this. I've already started cutting ties with Greg and the others involved. I want to make things right. For the hotel, for us. Karoline crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. And what happens when the next crisis comes along? Will you lie again? Cheat again? Sacrifice your morals because it's easier than facing reality? He opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself. She was right, and they both knew it. His actions had consequences not just for their marriage but for who he was as a person. He had become someone he barely recognized, someone willing to compromise his values for success. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Finally, Karoline spoke, her voice softer now. I came here last night hoping to find answers, hoping to see if there was anything left worth saving between us. But I don't know anymore, Daniel. I don't know if I can look past this. Daniel reached out tentatively, placing a hand on hers. I understand if you need time to think, to decide. Just don't give up on me completely. Please. Karoline pulled her hand away gently. I need space, she said firmly, to figure out what I want, what I deserve. He nodded reluctantly, understanding that pushing her would only make things worse. Okay, take all the time you need. With that, Karoline stood and headed toward the bedroom to gather her things. She needed to leave, to clear her head, and process everything she had learned. As she slipped on her shoes and grabbed her purse, Daniel watched her silently, his heart heavy with regret. Downstairs, Ryan, Daniel's assistant, was waiting anxiously in the lobby. When he saw Daniel approach, he immediately stood up. Boss, is everything okay? I heard there was some kind of mix-up last night. Daniel rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. It's complicated, he admitted, but we'll deal with it. Right now, I need you to focus on wrapping up those meetings with Greg. I want to sever ties as soon as possible. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Are you sure about this? Cutting off Greg could mean losing some major investments. I'm sure, Daniel replied firmly. I've spent too long chasing success at any cost. It's time to start doing what's right, even if it means taking a hit financially. Ryan nodded, sensing the seriousness in Daniel's tone. Got it. I'll get started on it right away. As Ryan walked away, Daniel leaned against the reception desk, his mind spinning. He knew repairing his relationship with Karoline wouldn't be easy, not after everything that had happened. But he also knew he couldn't give up. Not yet. He owed it to her, to himself, and to the life they once shared. Meanwhile, Karoline stepped outside the hotel, the cool morning air brushing against her skin. She hailed a cab and climbed inside, giving the driver an address before leaning back in her seat. Her thoughts were a jumble of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of hope. Despite everything, a small part of her still believed in Daniel. In them. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. As the cab drove away, she glanced back at the Belmont Grand Hotel one last time. Whether she returned remained to be seen. For now, all she could do was take things one step at a time. Back at the hotel, Amanda approached Daniel nervously. Mr. Leavitt, I wanted to apologize again for the mix-up last night. I truly didn't mean to cause any trouble. Daniel offered her a tired smile. It's fine, Amanda. Mistakes happen. Just try to be more careful next time. Amanda nodded gratefully, relieved that he wasn't angry. As she walked away, Daniel stared out the glass doors, watching the city come alive around him. He had always loved the hustle and bustle of urban life, the constant movement and energy. But today it felt different, empty, somehow. He knew he had a lot of work ahead of him, not just with the hotel, but with Karoline. Rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to try. For the first time in months, He allowed himself to imagine a future where they might find their way back to each other. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets. Karoline sat alone in her small apartment, staring blankly at the leather-bound folder she had brought with her from the hotel. It lay on her kitchen table, its presence heavy and unwelcome. She hadn't opened it again since leaving the penthouse suite, but she didn't need to. The contents were burned into her mind, each page a reminder of the choices Daniel had made, and the man he had become. Her thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of everything. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers and force him to explain himself. But another part of her hesitated. Confrontation wouldn't change the facts. It wouldn't undo the damage already done. What she needed was clarity, not just about Daniel, but about herself. Could she forgive him? More importantly, could she trust him again? As she wrestled with these questions, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it briefly, expecting a work-related email or a text from a friend. Instead, she saw a message from an unknown number. "I know you've seen the documents. We need to talk." Karoline frowned, her stomach tightening with unease. Who could this be? Before she could respond, another message appeared. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th Street in 30 minutes. Come alone." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever had sent the messages knew about the folder and likely more. Against her better judgment, curiosity got the better of her. Grabbing her coat, she slipped out of her apartment and headed toward the cafe. When Karoline arrived, she scanned the crowded room cautiously. At first, she didn't recognize anyone, but then a man sitting in the corner caught her eye. He was tall and well-dressed, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't quite place him. As she approached his table, he stood up and extended a hand. "Karoline Leavitt," he said smoothly. "Thank you for coming." Karoline hesitated before shaking his hand. "Who are you?" she asked bluntly. "And how do you know about those documents?" The man smiled faintly, gesturing for her to sit. "My name is Greg Lawson. I'm acquainted with your husband." Recognition dawned on Karoline's face, and she stiffened. "You're the one involved in all those shady deals." Greg nodded, unbothered by her accusation. "That's one way to put it. But let's not waste time on pleasantries. I assume you've read the files." "I have," Karoline replied, her voice cold. "What do you want?" "I want to make sure you understand the situation fully," Greg explained calmly. "Your husband has been playing a dangerous game, and now he's trying to back out. That's bad news for both of us." "For both of you?" Karoline echoed, raising an eyebrow. "How does this involve me?" Greg leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because you hold leverage whether you realize it or not. If word gets out about what Daniel's been doing, it won't just ruin him. It'll destroy everything he's built, including the hotel. And trust me, when I say people like me don't take kindly to betrayal." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. His words carried a veiled threat, one she couldn't ignore. "Are you threatening me?" she asked sharply. No, Greg assured her, holding up his hands innocently. "Just pointing out the stakes. You're in a unique position, Karoline. If you play your cards right, you can protect yourself and maybe even come out ahead." "What exactly are you suggesting?" she demanded, her patience wearing thin. "That depends on you," Greg replied cryptically. "But consider this. Silence can be very valuable, or very costly depending on who you choose to share it with." Karoline stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not interested in games," she said firmly. "Stay away from me and stay away from Daniel." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the cafe, her pulse racing. She didn't trust Greg, not for a second. But his words lingered in her mind, planting seeds of doubt and fear. What if he followed through on his threats? What if Daniel's actions came back to haunt them both? Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Daniel paced anxiously in his office. Ryan had informed him earlier that Greg had canceled their scheduled meeting, citing personal matters. Daniel didn't buy it for a second. He suspected Greg was up to something, though he couldn't prove it yet. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. His phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Amanda, the receptionist. "Mr. Leavitt, there's someone here to see you," she said nervously. "A Mr. Lawson?" Daniel froze, his blood running cold. "Send him up," he instructed curtly. Minutes later, Greg strolled into Daniel's office, his demeanor calm and collected. He took a seat without being invited, crossing one leg over the other as though he owned the place. "Daniel," he greeted casually. "We need to talk." "I figured as much," Daniel replied, keeping his tone neutral. "What do you want, Greg?" Greg smirked, leaning forward slightly. "Let's cut to the chase. You've been distancing yourself lately. Cutting ties, cleaning house. Why? Afraid someone might find out about our little arrangement?" "It's over, Greg," Daniel stated firmly. "I've made my decision. I'm done playing your games." Greg's smile faltered, replaced by a steely glare. "You think it's that simple? You walk away and everything magically disappears? Newsflash, Daniel. It doesn't work like that." "Are you threatening me?" Daniel shot back, his voice rising. "No, I'm warning you," Greg corrected. "If you try to expose me, I'll make sure you regret it. And if you think I won't drag your precious wife into this, you're sorely mistaken." At the mention of Karoline, Daniel's anger flared. "Leave her out of this," he growled. "This is between you and me." "Oh, but she's already involved," Greg countered smugly. "In fact, I had a lovely chat with her earlier today. She seems conflicted." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did you say to her?" "Enough to remind her of the stakes," Greg replied vaguely. "Now here's the deal. Keep quiet, and we'll pretend none of this ever happened. Cross me, and you'll lose everything, including her." For a moment, Daniel considered lashing out, throwing Greg out of his office and telling him to go to hell. But deep down, he knew Greg wasn't bluffing. The man thrived on manipulation and intimidation. Crossing him would only make things worse. For everyone. "I'll think about it," Daniel said finally, his voice low. Greg stood, brushing imaginary lint off his suit. "Good choice, but don't take too long to decide. Time isn't on your side." As Greg left the office, Daniel sank into his chair, his mind spinning. He couldn't let Greg win, but he also couldn't risk losing Karoline or exposing her to danger. There had to be another way. Later that evening, Daniel called Ryan into his office. "I need your help," he said urgently. "We're going to gather evidence against Greg. Every email, every contract, every piece of dirt we can find. I want it all." Ryan looked skeptical. "Do you really think that's wise?" "If Greg finds out—" "He won't," Daniel interrupted. "Not if we're careful. This ends now, Ryan. No more lies, no more compromises." Ryan nodded reluctantly, sensing the determination in Daniel's voice. "All right, I'll start digging." Hours later, Karoline returned to the Belmont Grand Hotel, unable to stay away any longer. She found Daniel in the penthouse suite, pacing anxiously as he scrolled through emails on his laptop. When he saw her, relief washed over his face. "You're here," he said softly, setting the laptop aside. "I am," Karoline replied, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Daniel nodded, bracing himself for whatever she had to say. "Okay, what is it?" Karoline took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Greg came to see me today. He knows about the folder, and he made it clear that he won't hesitate to use it against us." Daniel cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "I should have known he'd pull something like this. I'm sorry, Karoline. I never wanted you to get dragged into this mess." "Well, I am," Karoline shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "And I need to know what you're planning to do about it." "I'm working on exposing him," Daniel admitted. "Ryan and I are gathering evidence. Once we have enough, we'll turn it over to the authorities." Karoline studied him closely, searching for any sign of hesitation or deceit. "And if it backfires? If Greg retaliates?" Then I'll deal with it, Daniel said firmly. But I won't let him hurt you, Karoline, not again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared history hung in the air, mingling with the uncertainty of the present. Finally, Karoline broke the silence. I believe you, she said quietly. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. You'll have to earn it, Daniel, one step at a time. He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. I will, he promised, whatever it takes. As they stood together in the dimly lit suite, surrounded by shadows and secrets, they both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in months, they faced it side by side, ready to fight for their future no matter the cost. The next morning, the Belmont Grand Hotel buzzed with its usual energy. Guests checked in and out, bellhops scurried around with luggage, and the faint hum of conversation filled the lobby. But behind the scenes, tension simmered. Daniel Leavitt paced his office, his mind racing as he reviewed the evidence Ryan had gathered against Greg Lawson. Emails, financial records, and incriminating documents were spread across his desk, each one a piece of the puzzle they needed to expose Greg's illegal activities. Ryan sat nearby, tapping away on his laptop. We've got enough to take him down, Ryan said confidently. But we need to be careful. If he finds out what we're doing, things could get ugly. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight with determination. We'll move quickly. Get everything ready to send to the authorities. I want this done by tomorrow. Ryan hesitated, glancing up from his screen. Are you sure about this? Once we cross that line, there's no going back. I'm sure, Daniel replied firmly. This ends now. For Karoline, for us, for everyone Greg has hurt. While Daniel and Ryan worked tirelessly, Karoline spent her day reflecting on the events unfolding around her. She wandered through the hotel, taking in its grandeur, the chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the elegant furnishings. It was beautiful, yes, but it also felt hollow somehow, a symbol of everything she and Daniel had lost in their pursuit of success. Her thoughts drifted to the previous night, to the promise Daniel had made to protect her. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he would follow through. But after everything she'd seen, the folder, Greg's threats, it was hard not to feel wary. Still, something deep inside told her that Daniel was different now, that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to change. As evening approached, Daniel called Karoline to meet him in the penthouse suite. When she arrived, he was standing by the window, gazing out at the city skyline. The soft glow of the setting sun illuminated, his face highlighting the lines of stress etched into his features. You wanted to see me? Karoline asked cautiously, closing the door behind her. Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious. I did. I wanted to update you on what's happening. We're close to exposing Greg. By tomorrow, everything will be in the hands of the authorities. Karoline's eyes widened slightly. That's fast. It has to be, Daniel explained. Greg is dangerous. The longer we wait, the greater the risk. She studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. All she saw was resolve. What happens after that? She asked softly. If everything goes according to plan, Greg will be arrested, and his schemes will collapse, Daniel replied. The hotel will take a hit financially, but we'll recover. More importantly, we'll finally be free of him. And us? Karoline pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens to us? Daniel stepped closer, his gaze steady. That depends on you, Karoline. I can't undo the mistakes I've made. I can't erase the pain I've caused. But I can promise you this. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. If you'll let me. Tears welled up in Karoline's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. It's not going to be easy, Daniel. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. I know, he admitted. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm willing to try for as long as it takes. Karoline looked away, her heart torn between caution and hope. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, let's see where this goes. But if you break my trust again, I won't, Daniel interrupted, his voice firm. You have my word. Before either of them could say more, Amanda burst into the suite, her face pale with panic. "Mr. Leavitt, Mr. Lawson is here, in the lobby. He says he needs to speak with you immediately." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Tell him I'm busy. I don't want to see him." Amanda shook her head frantically. "He won't leave. He says it's urgent." Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Karoline. "Stay here," he instructed. "Don't come out until I say so." Before she could protest, he hurried out of the suite, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She paced the room anxiously, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Greg had discovered their plan? What if he tried to harm Daniel? Downstairs, Greg stood in the middle of the lobby, his presence commanding attention. When he saw Daniel approaching, he smirked smugly. "Nice of you to finally show up," he sneered. "We need to talk." "Whatever you have to say it quickly," Daniel snapped, keeping his tone clipped. Greg leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I know what you're planning, and let me make one thing clear. If you go through with it, you'll regret it deeply." "It's over, Greg," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the knot of fear in his stomach. "Your threats don't scare me anymore." Greg's smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure malice. "You think you're clever, don't you? But you're forgetting one thing. You're not the only one with leverage." Before Daniel could respond, 2 police officers entered the lobby, flanked by Ryan. They approached Greg, handcuffs at the ready. "Greg Lawson, you're under arrest," one of them announced. Greg's face twisted in rage as he realized what was happening. "You stupid fool," he shouted at Daniel. "You have no idea what you've done." As Greg was led away, Daniel exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. It was finally over. He turned to Ryan, who gave him a thumbs up. "Good job," Ryan said with a grin. "Now let's hope the fallout isn't too bad." Daniel nodded, then headed back to the penthouse suite. When he opened the door, Karoline rushed to him, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "Is it done?" she asked breathlessly. "It's done," Daniel confirmed, pulling her into a tight embrace. "He's gone, Karoline. For good." They held each other for a long moment, the weight of months of tension finally lifting. When they pulled apart, Karoline smiled faintly. "So, what now?" Daniel cupped her face gently, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Now, we start fresh. Together. Over." The following weeks, Daniel and Karoline worked side by side to rebuild their lives. They decided to sell the Belmont Grand Hotel, using the proceeds to fund a new project, a cozy bed and breakfast nestled in the countryside. It was smaller, simpler, and far removed from the pressures of city life. But most importantly, it was theirs, a place built on honesty, trust, and shared dreams. Amanda, meanwhile, learned from her mistake and became a trusted member of their team. She often joked that her blunder had brought them back together, earning laughter and nods of agreement from Daniel and Karoline. As they stood outside their new inn on opening day, watching guests arrive with smiles and suitcases, Karoline slipped her hand into Daniel's. "Do you think we'll make it work this time?" she asked quietly. Daniel squeezed her hand, his gaze warm and unwavering. "I know we will, because this time we're doing it the right way." And for the first time in years, Karoline believed him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as strangers, but as partners. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them to a place where love, forgiveness, and redemption could flourish.